Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Larry Kuhn. It's good to see you today. I'm glad that you've joined us. We are pleased to present our operational psychology viewpoint virtual event today. And there are folks that are watching now, and you may be watching later because you can access this from our website at AspireVue.com. I'd like to ask you to register for our upcoming event that's called Generations Collide. It will be on October 17th. We'll have a panel discussion on generations in the workplace. If you have missed any of our past ones, again, you can go to our website, but definitely register there on our website for this upcoming presentation. Looking forward to that. It's going to be great. Uh, you know, Today I am so happy because we are looking at a very different topic today that is discussing the drama that we see in the workplace. Today's agenda has a number of things. After I frame the dialogue, we will be discussing drama queens and manipulators, and we will be joined by Dr. Brian Armstrong. He's a new AspireVue coach. I've known him for several years, and he's got some things to say about this topic, and I thought this would be great to involve him in this process. So I'll be introducing him in just a little bit. Just to understand what's going on with people, I think is the most important piece when we're dealing with drama in the workplace. Many people move into what I would call highly reactive roles. They step into it, and when we have to deal with them, whether it's on a team, just working with them individually, or even having a conversation, it can drain us and distract both us and our team from productivity and getting things done. So what we want to do today in the quick 30 minutes that we'll be connecting with you is to help you spot the patterns that create chaos and offer some tips to navigate the challenge. After our presentation today, we will open up a Zoom link where you'll be able to connect with us, and we'll be happy to field questions and discuss specific strategies for challenges that you may be facing. When I think about drama in the workplace, there are some kind of scary statistics that I found. 41% of employees report, according to Forbes, a recent survey, feeling stressed a lot of the day in the workplace. 15% report high burnout, and 8% report very high burnout. That suggests that a lot of the people that we deal with in the workplace and when we're teaming up to get things done have a very slim margin. They're very close to the edge. And we have to be on our guard because actually about 15 to 20% of assessed leaders do show, because I do lots of assessments, they show a proneness to display high levels of emotionality. That means throwing tantrums in the workplace and using manipulation and using emotions to get their needs met. These are types of people that like to stir the pot. I call it poking the bear a little bit, but they provoke chaos. And they often respond to others with impulsivity. That means they're not coming from a rational place, but emotional dysregulation. So these are the types of folks that we're calling drama queens and manipulators, but there's a lot of hyper emotionality. You know that when there is a person that is having an emotional reaction and being really kind of stinky about it, skunky, I call them, they're behaving unprofessionally, it has a tendency to pull on our own reaction. It affects us. And as a manager or a colleague, it's often really, really tempting to feel like you want to tell them off and maybe even treat them as a child. We'll say things like, well, hey, you need to calm down a little bit. We'll start to move against them. And sometimes as a supervisor, we'll take them to task right away. And I call that a stance of moving against, where we're going to persuade and convince them that they need to not be so emotional. If you're like me, you've found that that doesn't always work very well. There's another strategy that people take, which is, well, let's soothe them. They're all upset. There are lots of emotions going on. They're all over the place, and there's definitely an escalation. So there's an urge on some of us part, particularly as supervisors, well, I want to try to calm them down and soothe them. And if I can just kind of play that role of soothing, then maybe I'll feel better and so will they. There's another posture that is often taken instead of just moving against or moving toward to try to placate and appease. The other posture is to move away. We just say, hey, too much heat going on here. I'm going to withdraw and just shut down. And you'll see that when a group of people are around and somebody gets really angry and slams their fist or, has a big outburst or a tantrum, you'll see everybody do this. They're looking down. They just don't want to deal with it. So we need proactive strategies, not reactive strategies that almost insulate us from getting pulled in. You know, when we have people 15% and 8% that are already pretty close to the edge, we definitely need strategies. So I'd like to kind of think a little bit about the need for us to understand the emotional process. I love Bowen family systems theory. I'm a psychologist, and I learned a long time ago a very interesting thing about emotions, because we're talking about emotions today. One of the first things I learned was the reality that emotions are contagious. I have here an anthill, and Murray Bowen, who was a theorist from years ago, he used an anthill as an illustration. And he basically said that emotions are not really so much seated in our head and how we think about things, but they're really anchored to our biology. And he used the illustration of an anthill that if you kick an anthill on one side, even though these ants don't have any real cognitive or sentient ability, they will begin to become reactive. And he called that reactivity emotional process. It's an interesting thing because I tended to normally think about emotions like, well, these are just feelings that we have and these are just human. But no, it's not. It's a biological reactivity that is actually rooted very much in a primal survival instinct. It's a response and it's not rational. These ants that are acting, when you kick one side of it, suddenly they become very emotionally reactive. They're moving in to a fight or flight mode that is reactionary, and it's all about survival. These ants are not engaging with their prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that is executive function. They don't have that. They're just all about surviving. And actually, when we're talking about drama queens, drama kings, and manipulators, where there's a lot of emotional dysregulation, they're not moving into that prefrontal cortex part of their brain. They're moving into the back part of their brain, and it's firing up like crazy for flight, fight, freeze, or even that tend and befriend posture that I'm going to try to cooperate and make everything be okay and rescue us from this situation. I think it's important too to recognize that emotions in other people trigger strong impulses and urges. It's interesting that emotions really do have a function, and that function is they are the drivers for action. They're like the fuel, the jet fuel that propels us to act. And a lot of us think, well, I need to get rid of my emotions. And I made that mistake in the way that I was raised. And I'll talk about that in a second. But it's interesting to realize that we have a relationship with our emotions, and that relationship with my own emotions and emotions of others has really been shaped by what we learned from parents, from significant events, and from people that we had around us. And I also often use this phrase that as children, we're learning a lot. And I say more is caught than taught. We may have not been literally told this is what you need to do when you have this emotion, but you watch how our parents handled emotions, how they navigated conflict or differences. And it's what we observed. I've been around animals quite a bit growing up on the farm, and I remember seeing that a very young fawn a small deer didn't really have. I had one that wandered up in our yard one day, and it didn't really have a high sense of alarm and, just to run. But then what happens with children is they will often, and young people and young ones, they will often feel like, what's mom going to do? What's dad going to do? And they begin to internalize that and they act in that way. Hold on. Yeah. Emotions are learned. And there's a James Lang theory that says this, that when we first experience a emotion, that experience of that emotion will flavor and contaminate and taint, and in some ways predispose us to have that same experience of an emotion later. Everyone has a relationship with their emotions. And I was raised in a family where I saw emotions were a threat. I used to think, well, men are rational because that's what I saw with my dad. He didn't really get very emotional. I saw my mom was very emotional, kind of all over the place. And so I just internalized that, hey, women are emotional. Emotions for me as a kid were emotions are a sign of weakness. They should be avoided. And I learned for myself to stuff my emotions, disavow that, and I saw emotions as very threatening. That's what I learned. And nowadays, emotional intelligence says, let's understand and have a greater awareness of our emotions and the emotions of others. As humans, we're different than animals, and we need a vocabulary. So I like this. These are little tips that we can begin to take with us, and we'll wrap this all up after Brian talks here in just a second. But we need a vocabulary to be able to name an emotion. Something interesting happens when I have an intense emotion and I can say, I'm feeling confused. We begin to de-escalate. There's an interesting thing that often happens as well with emotions is that emotions get funneled to kind of the next spot of where we go, and that's anger. So we can have very intense emotions and they have a tendency to funnel. We need to be able as well to recognize that we have triggers that trigger our emotions in what I call the escalation cycle. So a couple of strategies to consider is identifying the emotion that we're feeling, noticing that pattern, interrupting that pattern in some way, and then shifting to interrupt that pattern with asking questions. Hey, what's going on for you? This means adopting a new posture toward our own and others' emotions, observing and describing well, and connecting with curiosity. Let me introduce now Dr. Brian, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about his perspective on emotionality. Welcome, Brian.
Good morning, everyone. One, I hope that I'm online and presenting. It's interesting we're talking about today with drama, and I've had my own technology drama for about the last half hour, which brought me some interesting stress. But I hope that I'm presenting well. Is everyone? I'm seeing Larry nods, Dr. Larry nods. So I assume I'm online and working finally. Great, fantastic. Well, thank you, Dr. Kuhn. One, I appreciate that setup because I am going to address a number of experiences and emotions in the workplace.
And he froze up. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
We're going to have an emotional reaction. Brian, are you there?
I feel like I'm here.
Yeah?
Can you hear me,
Yes.
Dr. Kuhn?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, good. Well, then let me get started again. Thank you for that handoff. I appreciate that frame up because I am going to address experiences in the workplace, feelings in the workplace, and how that shows up, especially when people are using that as a tool to manipulate the workplace. And I want to draw a very fine line. As I was preparing for today, a conversation I had with a number of colleagues was around the difference between someone who's expressive versus a drama queen. And really, where was that line? And the fine line I truly want to draw is someone who is focused on themselves and probably self-serving versus someone who is helping the organization and is expressing emotion, but fundamentally that emotion is still helping the organization, and it might show up as passion. It might cross the line sometimes, but a drama queen is somebody who, grabs that emotion and says, I'm going to use this emotion to manipulate the organization in a way that serves my self-interest before and above the organization. Because when I reflect on the amount of time that we spend at work, which is a significant portion of our daily life, how we spend our life and how we experience that time at work is incredibly important. If the work is meaningful, and by that I mean we're living our purpose, we're doing what's aligned with our own sense of purpose, it can be incredibly fulfilling. It's very important to find that in life. Otherwise, work becomes primarily transactional. Um, when we add to the quality of our coworkers, real teammates, people that we might even call friends, uh, somewhere we all work with and build a culture that is about working together. It's about contributing to how we spend our day, our life, about what we're doing during the day, uh, how we're trading our time, our life for, frankly, that paycheck. When that's positive, it's a fantastic feeling. And you know that when you're on your team and someone has your back, they support your work, they listen to your challenges, and generally they support and your success becomes part of the team success. You succeed because the team is succeeding. It's part of how we are doing this together. However, and given today's conversation, and as Dr. Larry's explained, there are some folks that we work with, and not everyone is a good or ideal team player. Some of those folks are in a spot where they're serving themselves. They're trying to resolve something. They're trying to work with something that is not in the interest of the team. I've certainly experienced people that have a lot of drama, that create drama or manipulate the system around them. And I often find that I get wrapped up in their drama. I mean, let's call it what it is. My first instinct is to listen to people, to pay attention, to work with them with where they're at. And I get wrapped up in that drama. As Dr. Larry's pointed out, drama queens, manipulators, those folks are very good at bringing us into what's going on for them. Um, it's, if we make it super negative, it's kind of insidious. It's very negative, but we don't always see it on the first step. On a more positive light, there could be some good directions for that. I'm going to get into that in just a second. But what I've got is drama is seductive. It pulls us in. Folks that do this repeatedly tend to be very good at doing it, whether that's on purpose or whether it's a habit that they have where they've learned this from a different organization or just as a life coping skill where they are bringing the attention around themselves. They're redirecting it towards something towards their desired outcome, and they're manipulating a situation that's more in line with what they want versus what's the organization wants, or possibly in worst case scenario, what's good for the organization. And so when I'm watching these folks, if I can observe that I'm getting sucked into it, what I first notice is, am I getting sucked in? And the second is, what's the disruption to the organization? And what's the disruption caused to the individuals around them? So let's take a second and think about that. Our organizations exist to deliver some service or product. They exist for a purpose. Activities and energies that detract from that purpose are often, um, off topic. They're distracting. And ultimately, someone who's overly dramatic, who's disproportionately dramatic, they suck the resources, the focus, the energy of the organization at large. For someone who is accidentally dramatic, and by that I mean someone who's not purposely doing this, that's behavior that a manager should be able to identify, should be able to mitigate, to interrupt, and through coaching, performance management, through other appropriate interventions, both identify, hedge, head off, and redirect in an appropriate way. For folks that are experiencing that, this could be small tantrums under the guise of being heard or being aggrieved. The end result is that if they get what they want and the organization is placating them, then If they continue that on purpose, if it's chosen, that's more what we're talking about today. That's the drama queens. That's the manipulators. This is somebody who is strategically using these behaviors to leverage an organization to serve their own self interest rather than possibly someone who's acting out their own, well, we'll call it personal trauma. Someone who is simply that's their way of being, but we can also help support that individual. For someone in the workplace who is leveraging that to manipulate the organization, that's a significantly different issue. For some individuals, that might be a survival technique, could be learned in a different organization, could have even been a preferred way of behaving given the organization. What I would say is a dividing line is someone who is more self interested versus organizationally interested. Someone who says, I'm going to live by a personal code of this is who I am and this is what I do to serve me versus how can I help or serve the organization? Because typically, when we're thinking about these behaviors being positive or negative, it's about whether the behaviors are in service to the organization. If we think about organizations existing for a purpose, and rarely is that purpose truly self-interested. Rarely is it about someone, an organization, taking care of just every individual involved. It's about a larger, broader purpose. I've worked in education. I've worked in utilities. All of them had a underlying ethos of public service. So if someone takes that behavior and is channeling it toward serving the organization, there might be some allowances. When it's not, when it's just about them, their career, their advancement, their promotion, that becomes much more of a problem. Look, if we make that positive, maybe that's marketing. Maybe we take that energy and we say, how do we manipulate or change people? We take the negative connotation of manipulation. We say, how do we help people make decisions that are not their own, that are not something they would choose on their own, and move them in a different direction? We might call that marketing. We might call that change management. We might call that, organizational development. On a negative side of that, we say that's somebody who is inappropriately drawing attention to themselves, who's using drama, who's using manipulation to advance their own career, who's advancing their own position within an organization, who's saying, I'm so self-important that I can behave this way and move myself forward regardless of the cost of the organization. Because when that behavior is more self-serving, when it's rooted in someone's, and we'll call this narcissism, although Larry's the psychologist between us, um, the desired result is to serve themselves at the cost of the organization. So where does this come from? Because if someone does it accidentally, they've learned this, it's a survival technique, they're getting by, then that can be interrupted. But when someone chooses this on purpose as a strategic approach, as a way to engage with the organization, then that's really where we're talking about somebody who's choosing to be disruptive, who's choosing to be self-serving. They want to do this. That's our drama queens. That's our manipulators. That's our drama kings. And so someone who chooses to manipulate others or move into tantrums and other highly dramatic behavior, uh, it could be because they're bored. They're looking to stir the pot. They're looking to cause some disruption because that emotional energy is exciting to them. Or worse, it's because they're looking to move and manipulate others based upon fear, based upon uh, some other emotion around, I can't deal with this disruption. And so I want to serve myself. But they use that to move the social, we'll say normalcy, the social positioning of the organization to focus on them because then they become more satisfied. They become more satisfied in their role, their function, their way of being. That comes at a super high cost to the organization. This type of behavior can be incredibly negative, it can be incredibly impactful. Their personal code of serving themselves before the organization comes at a cost to organizational culture, organizational operation, and frankly, organizational morale. There's a variety of perspectives in place here. As we see the picture here from it's showcasing Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage, and the empty table. Teamwork is one of the highest strategic advantages that organizations can offer, a functional team. And that's where people are not invested in politics. They're not invested in their own self-interest. They're invested in serving their organization at large. And when someone is looking at their own self-interest over the organization, that becomes a strategic disadvantage to the organization. If we shift over to some other quotes, and I think about the one from Jim Collins in his book It's Great, that powerful organizations, get the right people on the bus, the right people in the right seat, and the right people off the bus, or the wrong people off the bus, if you will. It's what filters do we have in place to make sure that we're not bringing people in that are going to detract from the culture that we want to have, or from the organization that we want to be running and operating? How are people going to contribute to who we are and what we do compared to people who are going to knowingly or purposely detract or draw from that? All of this calls for a high level of accountability and a high level of organizational clarity about who they're going to be. There was a great book, and pardon my phrasing here, by Robert Sutton. He wrote a book called The No Asshole Principle, or The No Asshole Rule, sorry. And the No A-hole rule was the short story, and I'll make this brief. I'll bottom line this. There's a collection of faculty. They're looking at resumes, and they had a great candidate on the table, and they said, this person would be fantastic. And everyone talked about their accomplishments, their contributions, the wonderful way this person contributed to the field. One person sat back, took a deep breath, said the challenging comment of, yeah, but, that person's an a-hole. And everyone, no one could disagree. And they all set that resume aside and they moved on to the next viable candidate. Through that, Robert Sutton and his colleagues decided that there was something powerful there about culture, about bringing in somebody who is not going to be toxic to the organization, somebody who is not going to hurt a team or the way that it operated. They wrote the book, wonderful. We've got that great reference at this point, but that notion of how are we going to set boundaries about what's acceptable in a relationship, what's not acceptable, who we're going to bring on board to our team, and who we're not? Because if we think about drama queens, we think about manipulators, they really thrive in that gap between who we are, how we're going to be, and what we do here, which is a great way to define culture, and what they are willing to do to compromise that culture. That's a spot where we as leaders, we as organizational leaders, as managers, as to be fair, even individuals, need to really be mindful of what do we accept? What are those boundaries that we have in our relationships? And who can we work with? How do we work with them? What can we interrupt? And to be fair, what filters should we have in place before we bring somebody on board? When we think about, drama queens and manipulators, it, it really makes us pause and think about what kind of organizational life do we want to have? What's the work experience that we want where we spend a majority of our life, our awake life during the week? And who do we want to work with to make something, positive and contribute to the world, compared to what's that baggage? What's that drama that we want to carry outside? Or where do we want to spend that extra energy during the workday? Drama queens, manipulators, they really thrive in that space where we aren't clear about what we want, where we don't have appropriate boundaries, where we have not stated that we're going to have appropriate accountability for people who misbehave in inappropriate ways, out of scope to what's going on. We certainly want people who are expressive. We certainly want the diversity of a variety of perspectives, but we don't need people who bring so much attention to themselves that they cause a problem for the organization.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. That was really good. I'd like to invite you all to join us, if you'd like, for dialogue. We're going to open it up in a Zoom channel. I'll have Denise put the link on the screen so that you can join us and meet with Brian and I over in there. And if you have questions about particular situations that you may be facing, we'd love to dialogue with you. AspireVue is here to connect with folks and resource them with the types of tools that they need to deal with these types of situations. Thanks so much for joining us today. And don't forget to check us out in our next virtual seminar, where we're going to look at a panel and actually look at boomers and Gen X and Gen Y and Gen Z and some of the differences there. And we'll have an extended session for that. That one should be really, really cool. And you can watch other ones that we've already done by visiting our website at aspirevue.com.